From New York is Donika Emini. She's a political analyst who has covered Balkan politics extensively. Thank you very much for joining us here on TRT World. How likely is it for this latest flare-up to result in a war between the two sides?
Good morning, Jafar. Thanks for having me. I've been talking about the Kosovo-Serbia issue during this year, I think more than 3 times with TRT World. This shows how sensitive the situation is security-wise in the Balkans. And we recently have seen, in the previous story, we talked about Ukraine and the war in Ukraine, and clearly that is linked to the tensions in the Balkans, and not only in Kosovo, but also in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and also what is happening in Montenegro. And obviously, the common denominator is Russia, and Russia challenging the West in what I see as the biggest success in the past years, because obviously we have the EU granting the candidate status to Bosnia and Herzegovina, and we have the accession negotiations opened for Albania and North Macedonia, and Kosovo is very close to visa liberalization, but also to has applied for EU membership. And all this, obviously, it is linked to what Russia wants in the region, which is instability. And the north part of Kosovo obviously has been one of the security weak spots of the West, which has been constantly used by Serbia, not only to challenge the status of Kosovo, but also to create and generate instability and, of course, strengthen the negotiation position of Vucic. Obviously, we have talked a lot about this issue, and we have been, in a way, foreseeing this coming. It is very unlikely to have a war between Serbia and NATO, because the war that Serbia had with NATO in '99 did not end up well for Serbia. But this is definitely playing with fire. All these small conflicts that are generated in the Balkans might end up to something that we have seen in the '90s, because without the EU integration perspective, most of the Western Balkan countries are basically finishing the unfinished business of the '90s.
Donika, in August, Kosovo's government basically said that Serbia was stirring up ethnic tensions in the region, and it was being backed by Russia. Now, certainly, there is a war in the region already taking place, the war in Ukraine. How do you think the European Union should react at this point if Kosovo's claims are true, that if Serbia is indeed being backed by Russia? What do you think the reaction from the European Union should be?
In between Kosovo and Serbia, there was always Serbia backed by Russia, and then Kosovo backed by the US and to some extent by the EU. The EU could have done way much more, to be honest, Jafar. It had all the cards, which would have been way much more successful than in the Eastern Partnership region, given the fact that Western Balkans has had the wars in the '90s, which ended with the NATO intervention. So the US basically has done this, the hard security job, leaving then the soft power to the EU, which meant the EU membership, democratization of the region, which should have happened in a fast track, and it did not happen. In relation to Kosovo and Serbia, obviously the EU has been leading the dialogue since 2011, and the fact that it failed to not only bring the parties towards the final deal, but it really turned the Brussels dialogue into conflict prevention exercise, rather than a process that would not only end the conflict between the countries, but also pave their way towards EU integration. And both of these, have failed. You have mentioned in the beginning that the EU facilitated a deal on IDs, but that deal has been signed initially in 2011. So basically, the EU has been recycling the old deals for the sake of doing something, but not necessarily leading the countries towards the final deal. So the EU could have done more, and the US was always there to back the EU in relation to Kosovo and Serbia dispute. But much also depends on the political willingness of the parties to actually solve the dispute. And obviously, if you see the situation on the ground, none of the parties
Right.
have the political interest to do so.
All right, Donika Emini, thank you very much for talking to us here on TRT World. Really appreciate your taking out the time.